I think you're not here for me. You're probably like, who is this guy? But there are several speakers, including the next one, that you probably are here for. So without further ado, please give it up for, from Summit 7, Jacob Horne, everybody.
The small setups, I always feel like Shooter McGavin, like just turning around whenever they do the intros. Okay, thanks for showing up, everybody. Did anybody else take a red eye to get here? Anybody? Anybody? No? You did? Awesome. Yeah, I landed like 2 hours ago. Okay, so thanks for having me here. We're 2 weeks away from the start of the phased rollout, which is pretty crazy because the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024, there were 2 meetings right across the street at the 1200 building on the top floor. AIA has a bunch of offices over there, and there were industry meetings between the DoD and industry, and it was a comically long meeting table where one side of the table was all of the people from all of the offices at the Pentagon. There was OSD for Research and Engineering, Acquisition Sustainment, DoD CIO, DIBCAC. Everybody was there on one side of the table, and the other side of the table were representatives from all of the mega prime contractors. Like, what you're imagining is what it looked like. There was Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop. Everybody was on one side, government was on the other side, and they had 2 of these meetings, and that was everybody's idea of the government meeting with industry. Did anybody hear about anything that came out of those meetings? No, you didn't hear anything about it, which has always annoyed me to no end. So we've put out a lot of content, if you've followed our YouTube channel or any of our content on LinkedIn, where we've tried to take some of the content from those meetings or those perspectives from those meetings that they don't share and try to filter it out into the ecosystem, because they have those meetings somewhat often, and none of that information ever seems to trickle down past the prime contractors. So it's very interesting that now, 2 years later or so, we're right across the street and we're about to start the phased rollout. Okay, so they gave me 30 minutes. They said, hey, can you summarize the last 10 years in 30 minutes? And I was like, ugh. And then they said, can you do Q&A too? And I was like, ugh. So we're going to run through a bunch of stuff. We'll try to cover as many of the details as possible and try to get to some of the questions, but just some overall major ideas. Am I pressing the right one? Left one? Oh, okay. There's a big delay. Are you pressing it? Okay. All right, we'll just do it that way then. All right, so all of this started with the requirements that were in defense contracts, right? So the main idea that I try to stress to everybody all the time is that CMMC is a verification program. CMMC is not a set of requirements imposed on contractors, except for a very, very small number of contractors who will have CMMC Level 3 requirements. CMMC Level 3 is the only thing that's actually establishing new requirements onto contractors. Level 1 and Level 2 are verifying the requirements that are already in existing contract clauses. And it goes back way further than just 2016, which a lot of people will say, oh, we've had these requirements since 2016. DFARS Clause 252, 204, 7012 is the clause that says when you handle DoD's controlled information, you must implement a set of requirements to protect that information. That clause was created for the first time in 2013, not in 2016. And if you go all the way back to the 2013 rule, you'll see this table, and it just contains a list of controls directly out of 853, NIST Special Publication 853. You guys familiar with NIST 853? It's humongous. It's humongous. The controls are humongous. The verification procedures for those controls are also humongous. In the corresponding document 853 alpha, the original set of requirements for the same defense contractors that are under the thumb of CMMC were originally 853 controls. And if you compare this set of 853 controls to what is in 800-171, 800-171 is a smaller set of requirements. So if we go far enough back, if we zoom far enough out on the requirements, defense contractors today have less things to do. They have fewer things to do than they did in 2013 if you were to go line by line on the actual set of requirements. That's important to remember because when we go to the next slide, we had these requirements in 2015 and then nothing happened. Or sorry, we had these requirements in 2013 and nothing really happened, right? The key thing about the requirements in 2013 is there was no verification mechanism, right? There was no CMMC, there was no proof that you had implemented the requirements, there was no audit, there was no nothing, right? It was just the form of DFAR 7012 that said by virtue of accepting this contract clause, you are stating to the government officially that you are complying with these requirements. By signing on the dotted line and accepting the contract, you have said, I have implemented those requirements in 853. And then a couple years later, in 2015, at the time, this was the largest compromise of federal information systems in history. So this was when the Office of Personnel Management was hacked by the Ministry of State Security in China. Does everybody in here have credit monitoring and identification monitoring because of this, right? Yeah. So it's a fascinating story about why they did this. They actually compromised OPM, as well as there was a massive hotel chain that got compromised as well, and a health insurance firm that was compromised all around the same time. They were able to take all that data and triangulate and identify covert assets in China and compromise American spies working in mainland China. So if you go to the next slide, the Chinese were actually able to eliminate CIA assets in China by virtue of compromising, it was like the Star Hotel chain, I think it was, OPM and health insurance, and they could reverse engineer whose identities were whose, which was pretty incredible. And James Clapper, the former DNI, said, yeah, props to them because it was pretty sweet. It was a pretty elegant way for them to uncover our systems of reconnaissance and spying in China. So everybody freaked out and they said, oh my God, we've got all this unclassified information that's obviously very sensitive and it's in cloud systems, and the DFARS clause that we gave to contractors in 2013 doesn't say anything about the cloud, and it came out 2 years ago and we got to do something about it. So if you go to the next slide, they did something about it. That same year, immediately after this happened, they jammed out a revision to DFAR 7012, and they put out a rule that revised the clause, and it said, hey, here's a new set of requirements that you got to comply with. Here's a new set of incident reporting requirements. You got to tell us if something happens. Here's a new set of things that apply when you put our data in the cloud. It was all a direct result of this hack of OPM. So, pop quiz. When was the deadline to comply with the revised version of DFAR 7012? So we had it in 2013. We revised it in 2015. When was the deadline to comply with DFAR 7012? December 31st of 2017, right? Wrong. Wrong. When this rule came out, it was an interim final rule, which means it went into effect immediately. And if you read the 2015 version of this rule, it doesn't say anything about December 31st of 2017. It says do the requirements right now because there's clearly a massive problem. So industry responded to this interim final rule and said, we need more time to implement NIST SP 800-171. But do you remember what we talked about with the 853 controls? There's less things to do in 800-171 than in the 2013 version of this rule, right? So when they put this out, they said, actually, we're asking you to do fewer things than you said you were doing 2 years ago, and now industry wants more time. So they scheduled a meeting in December of 2015, and they had I think it was 100 different companies that were there. Was anybody there in December of 2015? It was just another one of these industry meetings, right? And industry said, we need more time to implement 800-171. We know we said we were doing it in 2013, and we know that this is a smaller baseline of requirements, but, give us some more time. So you have the next slide. They updated the rule in 2016, and that's when they said, now the deadline to comply is December 31st of 2017 to comply with the requirements of DFAR 7012. So years and years before we ever start talking about CMMC verification of 800-171. We started out with a baseline of things in 2013 that everybody said they were doing. bad stuff happened in 2015. They said, okay, just do even less and just do that. And people said, no. We need way more time. The DoD said, okay, how about 14 months? How about in the end of December of 2017? And that's when everything is going to be required. And we're still not going to ask for an audit. Like, we're still not going to ask for proof. Like, just, is that, everybody's cool with that? Like, we can all do it by the end of 2017? You go to the next slide. In 2018, after all the dust had settled, NIST and DoD were giving an industry day, sort of a explanation of DFAR 7012 and 800-171 requirements. And both DoD and folks over at NIST were saying that we absolutely do not want to have to audit people. We absolutely do not want to create a verification mechanism. This is the last thing that DoD wanted to do. In Gus Gasani's words, he censors himself in the video, but the opinion of the Pentagon was that when you have third-party verification, they say it creates a cottage industry of non-value added shit. That was what he said in 2018. We do not want to do that. And Devin Casey, one of the guys who wrote the NARA Controlled Unclassified Information Rule, said, we do not want to introduce middlemen certification between industry and government unless it's absolutely necessary. Right? So this was after the OPM hack. This was after the industry basically said we didn't do anything in 2013. He asked us to do less. We asked for more time. Bad stuff happened. Right? Anybody knows what happens next? Next slide. Oh no, more bad stuff happened. And directly as a result of contractor information systems being compromised and the controlled unclassified information on those systems being compromised, the Department of Defense and their weapon systems experienced direct harms as a result of these requirements not being implemented. And as you can imagine, the DoD was, to use the technical term, freaking pissed. Go to the next slide. So the best way to summarize how upset they were is if you find the Breaking Defense article from 2019 from Brigadier General Murphy. He gives a very long interview, and it sounds eerily like the things that Katie Arrington used to say circa 2019, 2020. And it wasn't until I went back and read the old rules and the rationale in there, and then read General Murphy's interview, that Katie's comments started to make sense, right? A lot of people affiliated Katie Arrington with CMMC and her rhetoric as like its own thing. She was just mimicking the frustration from inside the building that was very clear if you had the context, right? If you had the backstory. And so in the interview, General Murphy is very clear where he basically says, if you don't do these requirements, you are a liability to the lethality of the joint force. That's been proven now multiple times as a result of contractor systems being compromised by not implementing the specific requirements that people have said that they have implemented, and we're over dealing with this problem. And that situation directly led to the creation of the CMMC program. If you go to the next slide. So the Senate Armed Services Committee got wind of this. They got the results of the DoD IG report after the Sea Dragon compromise. They found out that contractors weren't implementing their requirements. And so in their report that accompanied the FY20 NDAA, they said, we believe that prime contractors need to be held responsible and accountable for implementing these requirements, right? But remember, no one wanted to do this. Nobody wanted to do this. They said that this will be an important first step in securing the supply chain. So if you guys have seen the Senate version of the FY26 NDAA, we just did a podcast on this. They're changing the CPARS system. So the CPARS system is the annual report card that prime contractors get to evaluate how fun it is to work with them as the government. They're ditching the entire CPARS system and they're changing it to only list the negative things involved with working with you. And one of those things is your cybersecurity. So it's a major overhaul of the CPARS system, but they stressed back here in the FY20 NDA, this is just a first step. We didn't want to do it, we got to do it. It's very clear that has to happen. That's what's going to happen. Next slide. And then sure enough, Section 1648 of the FY20 NDAA, if you look up the existing CMMC rule, this is at the very top where they say the legal justification for this program, right? The legislative basis for the CMMC program is Section 1648 of the FY20 NDAA. They said that this is going to be imposed on the defense industrial base for the purpose of assessing the cybersecurity of individual contractors. This language is what directly led to the CMMC program, which stemmed directly from the Sea Dragon compromise, which stemmed purposely from, not having implemented the requirements that were in the revision, that went all the way back to 2013, right? For most people, they didn't hear about this until 2020 when the rule came out. You didn't hear about it until Katie Arrington got up on stage and started getting in everybody's face. But for the department, there was a long tail of why this all came to be. Next slide. Okay, this is a slide that quotes me, which I always find ridiculous, and it's from Summit 5, apparently. So, just to reiterate this, CMMC is not the thing that's making you do the requirements, right? The requirements have been in the contracts for a long time in various forms. CMMC is the thing that is making sure that you did the requirements. We see this all the time. Still see this all the time. It's like my personal pet peeve is people will say, CMMC is costing me $100,000. CMMC is costing me $150,000. No, it's not. Nobody has a receipt. By nobody, I mean 99% of people. Nobody has a receipt for a CMMC assessment that cost them $100,000, right? We know this is true. Anecdotally, we know this is true. In our heart of hearts, we know that a CMMC assessment from a C3 PAO for the average DIB contractor does not cost $100,000. When people say that CMMC is costing me $100,000, it's costing me $150,000, what they're saying is I had to implement all the requirements that are being imposed on me by those contract clauses in order to go through my CMMC assessment, which, if you remember, is exactly the reason why CMMC was created in the first place. So I always joke that every time somebody says CMMC costs them $150,000, another page gets added to the CMMC rules where they just repeat themselves that you've had the requirements all along. Next slide. Okay, so in 2020, they issued this interim final rule, which we all lovingly referred to as CMMC 1.0, and this happened right before the election, right? This happened under the first Trump administration. And there's no way that that would have caused an issue whenever there's an election, right? If you guys remember, when this latest election happened, people said, oh, this election's going to disrupt the rule. If you zoom out and you remember how the rulemaking process happened, this rule all happened at the tail end of the first Trump administration. So if the second Trump administration comes in, why would it disrupt the rule that they wanted? The bigger question is, why did the rule take so freaking long if it was this big of an emergency? If there was this long of an issue leading up to this emergency rule at the end of the first Trump administration, why would it have been delayed? Next slide. We don't have time to get into the reason why, but we all know in this room that it was delayed, and there's not really a good reason for why that actually happened. So they announce at the end of 2021, in November of 2021, that they're going to do CMMC 2.0. They're going to change this program around. They're going to calibrate this program from 1.0 to 2.0. They estimated that the rulemaking would take 9 to 24 months. In that period of time in 2021, from January to November, that was the period of time where we didn't know what was happening with CMMC. That was the period of time where it was the most uncertain, because we didn't know. It was a new administration. It got put on pause. They're reviewing the rule. People have short memories. Katie Arrington gets run out of town. There's a lot of reasons to believe that it's going to get derailed. And then in November of 2021, this was when I started to really harp on the rulemaking process, the DoD came out under a different administration, and they said, not only are we going to keep going with this program, we're going to do a second rule. If you know anything about the rulemaking process, it is incredibly expensive bureaucratically to go through the rulemaking process, especially in Title 32 of the Code of Federal Regulations. So for them to have reviewed this program, changed everybody around, and then still determined that they needed to do it and double down with a 32 CFR rule, that's when I was like, it's over. It's inevitable at this point. There's no way that a second administration would have committed to an additional rule on top of it if this wasn't an issue that transcended the politics, right? But people heard Katie Arrington's not around. There's a bunch of new rulemaking that has to happen. The program is paused. It was a big emergency, and now it's not happening, and everybody turned their brains off, and they focused on other things and didn't comply with the other contract clauses, right? Yeah. So DoD saw all this happening while they were going through the rulemaking, and they announced this program. The title on this slide is wrong. We'll fix it afterwards. And they just continued to get more frustrated. Remember, the DoD has a long memory about what's going on with these requirements not being implemented, and they saw everybody say, well, we're not implementing these requirements, and if you're not going to come verify, if you're not going to come make me prove that I've implemented the requirements, I'm not doing it, right? Put yourself in the DoD shoes and sort of picture the attitude from industry after they had extended the requirements in 2015, after they had already had the requirements in 2013, after Sea Dragon got compromised, F-22, F-35, all these things, and they're still dealing with the rulemaking. Okay. In parallel to all of this is a very interesting GAO report I recommend everybody read on the procurement administrative lead time. This is the #1 metric that I recommend to industry to pay attention to. Since 2019, Congress and the department have wanted the period of time between contract solicitation and contract award to be as short as possible. And they've been very successful in doing that. And that's a big problem in this context because CMMC is a condition of contract award. And most people don't think it's real until they see it in contract solicitation. And so if you wait until it's in the solicitation to get started on a project that might take you 12, 18, 24 months or longer, according to some people that I was talking to beforehand, and the period of time to contract award is 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, you got a big problem on your hands, right? And so I always recommend to people that you cannot base your strategy around what the CMMC rule says for the phased rollout. You can't base your strategy around what Katie happens to say, what Stacy happens to say. The #1 way to base your strategy is around the procurement administrative lead time for your customer. Because if your customer's lead time is 45 days, that means that you're going to see the requirement in a solicitation and you have to have the cert 45 days later to take award. And if it's going to take you longer than 45 days, you necessarily have to start on the requirements way before the solicitation comes out. So when everybody says we're waiting to see it in a solicitation, and I say, how long is your PALT time window? And they go, what's that? It's a big problem. So definitely look into that for your specific customer. Next slide. Yeah, this is just a quick example. When the government opens again, we'll see the long-range acquisition forecasts for most of the DoD components. You can go onto their websites and you can find this. You can look at the opportunities that they're planning to put out for solicitation, when they plan to put it out in a solicitation, and when they plan to award it. So if you know specifically what kind of work you want to go after, or what kind of work your customer, if you're a subcontractor, is going to go after, you can see in the long-range acquisition forecast, this contract is going to get solicited in Q3, and it's going to get awarded in Q4, which means you're going to have 3 months from the time you see you need CMMC level X to getting CMMC level X to take award of that work. So this is the way that I recommend to people to make it seem real for your actual strategy on the ground. Once you get away from the rulemaking rhetoric, it doesn't really give you the specifics for how to plan what's going on. Okay, next slide. Oh, that's it. Okay, how did I do? Wow, okay, perfect. Wonderful. We glossed over a lot, but I hope that gives everybody some general context. Does anybody have any questions? I think we have a few minutes. Yes, sir.
CMMC level 3 off over in the horizon, phase 3 of the rollout. The mechanics of engaging with DIBCAC to get yourself CMMC level 3 certified. Anything that you're seeing related to that? How you engage with DIBCAC?
You're supposed to email them.
Okay.
Yeah, you're supposed to email them. That's it. That's it. The best indicator that we have seen for knowing whether you will need CMMC level 3 is if DIBCAC has shown up of their own volition and said, we're going to do an assessment on you. If you've received what they call a DIBCAC high assessment, those are not random lotteries. So if you've talked to enough people who have received a DIBCAC high, almost all of them do pretty high-speed, cool stuff. That's not a coincidence. So if you get a DibCAC high, you're going to need CMMC level 3. You should email them and plan ahead. Also, there was that leaked memo. Apparently, it was an actual leak. Anybody in the supply chain under Golden Dome, which is more than the original estimate that the DoD had, apparently Golden Dome supply chain and next-gen encryptors are prime candidates for needing CMMC level 3. The step up between CMMC level 3 and CMMC level 2 is big. The benefit, though, is that because those are actually new requirements, they weren't, carryovers from 2013 and 2015 and 2016, because they're actually new requirements, they are new costs. And so if you aren't compliant with 7012, you can roll those costs into the new costs that the DoD is expecting. The big irony here is that in their haste under CMMC 1.0, when everything was a big emergency, they told everybody, this is all new, right? It was like the new shiny thing. Under the hood, it was still the same requirements that everybody had, but DoD was kind of willing to look the other way. When industry pushed back against 1.0 and they came out with CMMC 2.0, they said, we're strictly aligning with the requirements that are already in existing contracts, and that evaporated the cover that everybody had. If we had kept up the charade under 1.0, we could have all said, oh, it's new, so we've got new costs, and people who hadn't implemented the requirements could have had new costs, even though they hadn't done anything. Now there's nowhere to hide, and if you suddenly have new costs, it's because you weren't compliant. So it's kind of the big irony of shifting from 1.0 to 2.0. Anybody else? I think we have another minute or two. Yes, sir.
Jacob, so could you, I know everybody's worried about getting certified today, right?
Yeah.
Can you touch on some of the things that they have to do to keep certification? I think that's a big part that people are missing because they're just so focused on getting, it's not like SOC or something where it's just a moment in time. How do they actually keep compliant?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people get, moved into like enclave solutions, right? And we sell enclaves, and we tell people all the time that is not a long-term solution for most people. There's a lot of companies out there that are basically trying to do a digital / security / compliance transformation in like 30 days. And, just digital transformations for legacy companies are not easy things to do. So, in our experience with our clients, we partner directly with the clients because we're a managed provider. So we kind of live in their environment over an extended period of time. I'm not really sure how, I'm sure some of the companies around here on the break could say that are doing it completely internally. For us, it's just kind of the business model where, they're hiring us to manage a part of their company, essentially as an outsourced IT and security department over a period of time. So all that maintenance, kind of happens with the service. But if you're doing it internally, then it's all on you. So, yeah, it's not a one-time thing. So, yes, sir.
Should companies start looking at 171 R3?
Maybe. So, the question was, should companies look at 171R3 instead of 171R2? CMMC will not show up to verify 171 revision 3 for I don't know, how long is the government going to be shut down? 2 years? 3 years? So what we would be able to call CMMC 3.0 is when 32 CFR 170, the CMMC policy rule, gets revised. DoD has already started working on that, but rulemaking takes a while. Now, it won't take as long because they're not creating it from scratch like this first one. It's a revision, but rulemaking still takes a while, and who knows what's going on right now. So you won't have to worry about 171 Rev 3 for a while. You could honestly, at this point, probably make it through a full life cycle of your existing 171 Rev 2 certification period before that probably becomes a reality. There's some backwards compatibility you have to juggle with things that have changed between 171 Rev 2 and Rev 3. So like if you have the people and the budget and the cycle and the curiosity and nothing better to do, then you can do it. You definitely don't have to though. And it's a lot of work. So maybe. We have had some people who want to do it to future-proof, but if your certification is good for 3 years and you're future-proofing for something that's going to be in 3 years, it's hard to recommend, right? We'll take your money, but it's a very situational type of thing for sure. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Oh yeah, great. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thanks, man. Great job. Thank you. Okay, fantastic. Thank you again, Jacob. So that lays some groundwork, gives some context to the CMMC program requirements. Long story short, it is here. It is here for real. November 10th, we know, is when the CMMC contract clause, DFAR 7021, will begin to show up into DoD's contract requirements, which will then be required to flow down from the primes on.